Hey, what's going on, Los Angeles? What is up, Ramley? Welcome back to another special episode of the Rams Skinny here on the LAFB network. Got another special guest for you during this off season. We love having all these guests on, especially when content is a little bit more of a challenge here in June. But these guys over at Pro Football Focus work harder than almost anyone out there. So we're blessed to have another one on with us. His name is Max Chadwick, college football analyst for PFF. Max, thanks so much for the time. How are you doing today?
No, I'm doing great, guys. It's fun for me on.
Absolutely. Skinny, what's up, brother? How you doing today?
Doing fantastic, man. This is our third pro football focuser. He's the they're the focused.
Who are the other two you had on?
We've had Sycamore on twice, and then we had
the worst.
Yeah, just terrible guy. And then we had Monson on, and I have to say that the crowd, our audience, not a big fan of Monson and his takes and his Rams takes.
He's a very he has some takes that I know a lot of people don't agree with. He's out there for sure, but I think it makes him so great at the same time. So yeah, I'm sure Steelers fans don't love him. I know. I didn't know Rams fans didn't either, but yeah, he definitely isn't afraid to give his opinion, which I think is what makes him great, but also of course makes him a little polarizing for some fan bases as well.
Yeah. Well, it's so funny. We had him on and the stuff that he answered about the Rams, like me and Ryan didn't think anything of it. And then all of a sudden the comment section, we're just like, you know how they go. So I was like, apparently it was controversial with the Rams, but no, always great. And all you guys are great at what you do. So we appreciate the hard work and giving us lists that we can use for content. So that's always helpful with your grades and stuff. So, but your focus obviously is on the college football realm, and draft obviously is a few months or so removed, but this Rams draft class, I think, has been met with overall positivity, at least among the Rams fan base and what they're able to do, getting Verse at 19, getting Braden Fiske trading up in the second round. Blake Corum, I think, has been nicely received and down the list. So we won't go every player with you, Max, but I think to start, just came out last week. There were mumblings about this on draft day, that the Rams, and we reported it here at LAFB, that the Rams were interested in moving up potentially into the top 10. And Skinny and I did a show and we talked about, we personally thought that was Brock Bowers. We didn't know for sure, but that was our thought. Comes out just a few days ago based on the Roku documentary that it was indeed, in fact, Brock Bowers they wanted to go up for with the Jets. They end up staying pat. They get Jared Verse. They get Braden Fiske in the second. So my question for you is, looking at the Rams makeup, looking at all in the draft, would it have behooved the Rams better to make that trade and have Brock Bowers here in LA? Or do you think how it worked out for them in landing Verse and Fiske was actually the better play overall for where this team sits?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, because if you asked me who the best football player in the 2024 draft was, it was Brock Bowers, in my opinion. I think he's the greatest tight end we've ever seen in college football, and he's certainly up there for the greatest tight end prospect we've ever seen as well. So I think he's definitely worthy of being a top 10 pick, and obviously it makes a lot of sense why a guy like Sean McVay, who innovative offensive genius he is, would do really well with a guy like Brock Bowers, who's just kind of a chess piece. Calling him a tight end is kind of a disservice. He's just a chess piece for an offense to use out there, really. So it makes a lot of sense why they wanted to go up and get him. So I think I would have loved that if they did do that, but I still love Jared Verse, right? I think you guys needed help in the edge room badly. And you got, in my opinion, the second best edge defender in the draft in Jared Verse, and the best one, Latu, was picked a few picks earlier, so it's not like he was even available for you guys to pick him up. So I like Jared Verse a lot. Now, it's going to be interesting because I think he's a little bit better with his hand in the dirt, and I know LA likes to use a 3-4 scheme where he's going to be standing up in a 2-point stance, but I still think he's going to be a really effective player for them. I do love Braden Fiske. I actually was lucky enough to interview him a couple months before the draft. He was an awesome guy, so it makes a lot of sense why the Rams wanted to get him in there, not only as college teammates with Jared Verse, but I'm sure he murdered the interview process. And he had a great year. He had a great Senior Bowl, great combine. He did an amazing job in the offseason of really boosting his stock. I will say the trade up to get him was a little steep for my liking. I know the Rams have kind of done that in the past where they don't really care about the quote unquote value of draft picks, and it's worked out for them, obviously getting a Super Bowl out of it. But just value wise, trading a couple second round picks for another second round pick, don't love that. But in terms of a player they got in Braden Fiske, I think he's a really good player. So I think they did a good job in grabbing him as well.
Yeah, definitely. It's the whole world has changed now that Aaron Donald is retired, and it's going to be interesting to see exactly kind of what they do with that defensive front. All young guys across the board. I think the oldest is a second year, Kobie Turner and Byron Young. So fascinating stuff. It's really interesting, and I mean, I can't remember if it was Sycamore that did recommend or think that Brock Bowers on. He turned. I think he turned me on to that idea, and I got really excited about it within this offense. But I think this offense is going to be really, really something special. Which I guess brings up the next guy here, Blake Corum. What do you think of that kind of backfield there with Kyren Williams and him heading that up?
I think it's actually pretty funny because I going into it, I thought Blake Corum was a lock to go to the other LA team, the Chargers, right? I mean, Los Angeles Chargers had a massive need at running back. Jim Harbaugh loves his Michigan guys. Obviously, he loves Blake Corum. I thought that was a lock, honestly. So as almost as much of a lock as Caleb Williams going to the Bears #1. And I was like, sometime on day 2, the Chargers are going to pick him up, and he ended up going to the other LA team, honestly, in the Rams. So I like him a lot. I think he's one of the top running backs in the class. His vision is impeccable, honestly. He's got really good agility. Didn't look as explosive as he did in 2022, and I think a lot of that was due to the knee injury. So hopefully he can fully recover and be a top guy for them alongside Kyren Williams in that backfield this upcoming season. But even with the knee injury, he still was a really effective running back for Michigan. And quite frankly, one of the best running backs we've had in college football in recent memory, honestly, when you look at his entire career. So Blake Corum is an absolute superstar in college football. Not the biggest guy in the world, but neither is Kyren Williams either. So I think that's it's going to be really fun to have two kind of similar-ish backs in that same offense with Kyren Williams and Blake Corum.
Yeah, we've talked a lot how since the draft we've really come around, because at first, we mentioned on our show last week that our thought was, hey, you get a player that brings something different to the field, more of maybe a bigger back that can add different value in goal line or short down to go distances, and so that was kind of our thought process and our preference. And Blake Corum is literally Kyren Williams like 2.0. But then listening to McVay and Snead, they've said many times like that's the runner they like, and so they want that type of runner on the field at all times. So that makes 100% perfect sense, and I think it was a slam dunk pick when you look at that kind of philosophy and that strategy in terms of do that. So Max, when you, like I said, we're not going to go down the whole list, but when you look at the rest of this class, Cameron Kinchins, they also got in the third safety. Brennan Jackson, who I think is a nice edge out of Washington State. Jordan Whittington, wide receiver out of Texas, I think is a fun name when you look at his potential. Obviously health and production maybe isn't as high there, but a 6th round pick, high ceiling. So maybe one of those 3 names or someone else. Is there just a name that you really like the Rams kind of getting later rounds, as they've proven over time that they kind of have found these gems late in the draft to become real solid starters in the NFL? Do you see one of those in this draft class?
Yeah, I'm going to say one that I'm sure not a lot of people are even care about or talking about right now, and it's Joshua Karty, the kicker out of Stanford. The whole time in the pre-draft process, I've been saying this. I said, hey, listen, you want to talk generational prospects, we can talk about Marvin Harrison Jr., we can talk about Brock Bowers, we just got to talk about Joshua Karty as well. Joshua Karty has a 97 career grade in our grading system. That is the highest we've ever given to a kicker. And we've been doing this since 2014 for college football. So over the last decade, he has the highest career grade of any kicker we've ever seen. He had a highest grade this past season. The year before, he was the 2nd highest graded kicker in the country. He's 7 for 10 from 50-plus yards in each of the last 2 years. 2nd most 50-plus yard makes in that span. He's only missed 1 kick from 49 yards and in since 2022. So he's 34 for 35, and he's only missed 1 extra point in his career as well on 73 attempts. So I think he's the best kicker we've seen in the last decade. And I know it's not as sexy of a position as anywhere offensively or defensively, but I think he is going to be a long time starter for Los Angeles as their starting kicker. And I thought he was by far the best kicker in the draft. He wasn't even the first one taken. And I think he's going to be an excellent kicker in the NFL and might even be one of the best kickers in the league pretty quickly.
You're talking our language, man. We've spent a long time the last few years just crying about this kicker situation. Picking guys up, releasing them, missing kicks. It's so frustrating. So I'm glad you're super on board with that guy there. Were there any surprises on on this from this draft class that you were kind of piqued your interest and maybe have grown to like or still confused about?
It's a good question. Not really. Another thing I really hated, honestly. I think Cam Kitchens was a guy that a lot of people thought was going to be a first-round pick entering the season, including myself. I actually had him as a first-round pick in my way too early mock draft April. And he really he didn't have as good of a year as he did the year before. He did battle injuries this past season, so that played a huge part in it. And then he had, quite frankly, a horrendous combine. And then that really, I think, dropped him down boards as well. But I still like him. I think, where they got him at number 99 overall, like a top 100 pick. Yeah, I think that's very, you could stomach that, right? And I think he's a guy that I think could ultimately be a starter for them long term. And he really, in 2022, he was probably the best safety in college football. So he really just had a down year this year. Like I said, he battled injuries, and then the combine he didn't really look too great at the combine either. But I like him. I like Brennan Jackson. I like his mentality a lot. I think he could be a good rotational guy for them. No, I don't think he'll ever be a starter for them, but he's a good rotation piece in that edge room. Tyler Davis is a really productive player at Clemson for a few years now. Again, I think he's more of a rotational piece, but I think he's a great run defender. I think he will add a lot to that defensive line that can use some help. Obviously, after losing the greatest probably defensive player of all time in Aaron Donald. So yeah, I like a lot of what they did. I think Bo Limmer is an interesting guy too. He played really well at guard. Then he moved to center this past year and didn't look quite as comfortable at center. But I think he's a little versatile and that he can play either guard or center for them. So yeah, I think LA overall was a really solid class. I think we gave it a B+ in our grading scale. And I would probably agree it's right around that range. I think they had a really, really solid draft this year.
Yeah, Max, when you look at, I don't know how closely, obviously you cover the whole league and cover just, college football, which is a behemoth to try to get all these prospects and looks. So, so much work goes into that. But when you look at the Rams draft strategy specifically, and again, you probably haven't had to deep dive, but it's a pretty national story, the F them picks mentality and kind of just how they've built their roster, just very differently than the rest of the NFL. This year, they kind of went, with the more normal approach. They obviously did have the trade up, as you alluded to, in the second round for Fiske, but outside of that, they weren't too busy as they usually are in years. They stayed pat at 19. They drafted. We joked all during the offseason, Max. We were like, all right, the pick has to be a defensive end or a defensive tackle. You lose Aaron Donald. They don't sign anyone in free agency. It has to be the pick. But knowing Les Snead, it's going to be either a quarterback or an offensive lineman because they just don't do anything by the book. All of a sudden, they do it by the book. They draft a defensive end in the first round. They go D-tackle in the second round. And it's just, oh, wow, what's going on here? So I guess I'm saying all this in a way of saying just what's been your thoughts just on the Rams kind of draft philosophy? And were you surprised that this year was seemingly very different than it had been in years past?
You talk about Les Snead, you're expecting him to do it at quarterback or offensive tackle. I mean, if I would have been expecting him to trade the pick for a star player, honestly. I think that's has been his MO, obviously. And this is actually one of my favorite fun facts of this whole offseason was been, this is the first time the Rams have made a first round pick since Jared Goff back in 2016. So it's been 8 years since the Rams have made a first round pick, which is quite frankly insane. Like that has been that long and that many picks have been traded that they have not picked in the first round in 8 years. That is an eternity to not be picking a first round pick. And I think it's starting to catch up to them a little bit. Obviously, all the superstars they traded for are aging or out of there already as well. I think it's, but they're still a playoff caliber team, right? Because I think they've done a great job of, like you said, finding the guys in day 2, finding the guys in day 3, finding, free agents as well that are on cheap deals to come in and contribute to this team. And they're still a playoff caliber team this year. So, when they were making all these moves to go for a ring a couple years ago, we were all saying, okay, this is great for right now, but the bill's going to come due, and all of a sudden the Rams are going to be one of the worst teams in the league. They've kind of handled it really well, and they right now in this period where you expect them to be one of the worst teams in the league, they've done really well and kind of handled it and and been able to get through it. Now, of course, when Matthew Stafford retires, they're going to have to find a franchise quarterback. But I still have all the faith in the world as long as Sean McVay is coaching. And, Sean McVay, obviously, we don't know how long he wants to be coaching. But I like what the Rams are doing. Now, again, the Braden Fiske trade, don't love that. I love the player. I love the value where they got him. But I just the trading 2 second-rounders for just a second-rounder, that I don't love that. But that's kind of what Les Snead has done, right? He's never been by the book. He's never cared about the analytics of trading draft picks, which, of course, we at PFF really value draft picks. And Leslie kind of goes against that a little bit, but it's also worked out for him as well. So yeah, it's hard to say, because obviously it's a double-edged sword sometimes when they're getting great players, but they're trading a lot of assets to do it. But I do think they've done a good job of, like I said, handling the bill that has come due now, and they're doing a good job of kind of making their way through the adjustment period they have from being one of the best teams in the league to still a playoff caliber one, when a lot of other people thought they would be one of the worst teams in the league by now.
We're pretty convinced that we're taking the over 8.5 wins for the Rams this year. What do you think from the outside looking in?
That's a good question. Yeah, good question. I think I don't know, and I don't want to become a Sam Monson and have all your listeners hate me here. I think I'm going to predict the Rams to finish 8th in the NFC, so right outside the playoff window for them. I do think that the Bears are going to end up stealing a spot this year as well. The Rams, I think 8.5. I think it's the perfect line. Actually, in our power rankings tool, we have the projected win total based off a lot of simulations, and it's exactly 8.5 wins. So I think it's a perfect line for Vegas. And if I'm making betting advice, I would say do not bet on that line, because I think it's as perfect as you get for the Los Angeles Rams. But yeah, I think 8.5, I can go above that. Yeah, I think they got some really talented players. I love what they did on the defensive line, handling the loss of Aaron Donald. And you got Cooper Kupp, you got Puka Nacua, you got a healthy Matthew Stafford. Yeah, I like and Sean McVay drawing up plays, obviously, in a great run game too. I think 8.5 is right around the range, I would say, for them. And I think they're right on the edge of being a playoff team. And if I had to predict it right now, I'd probably say that LA just misses out in the playoffs. But it is really, really tight with them and the Bears right now, in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, Vegas seems to know what they're doing with betting lines. I think it's like they've done it before, so they're usually pretty good at that. Yeah, we like the over, but it's going to be an interesting season. I mean, we've talked a lot that the defense, there's just so much newness. Obviously losing Donald, but losing your DC, losing your assistant, defensive coach in Jimmy Lake, going with Raheem Morris. So, not necessarily a new system, but a new guy calling the plays, new coaches on staff. A lot of new players, a lot of new faces. So it's just so much newness what they're going to be. But obviously the offense has a ton of talent, and they still have the hierarchy of McVay, Stafford, Kupp, like you alluded to. So one more draft question for you, Max. Not to put you too much on the spot, we don't have to get too specific. But when you look at this undrafted free agent class, the Rams seem to, a lot of teams do, but seemingly have been able to find pretty good talent from their UDFAs and usually get one or two that end up making the roster. And this year I think is no different when you look at potential names like Omar Spates out of LSU. And I really like Justin Dedich out of USC. I know they got some depth there, but he could certainly provide. So is there anyone out of these 16 undrafted free agents that maybe in your deep dives of college rankings, you're like, hey, this is a guy that I thought maybe could have been drafted and fell to the Rams here, or just that you like in general?
Yeah, I think Justin Dedich is the guy I was going to bring up. I think he's, USC's been much maligned for their offensive line over the past few years. I think a lot of that was due to Caleb Williams just holding on to the ball longer than anyone else, basically, in college football. So I think they kind of got a bad rap, honestly, at USC for their offensive line. I think Dedich has been a really productive player for them at guard for them. So I think he's a guy that I like. I'm looking at Drake Stoops has been a really productive player. Don't really know how well he'll do in the NFL, but he was great at Oklahoma, obviously. I think he's an intriguing player. Anthony Goodlow, I like as well, the edge defender. I think he graded out really well for PFF throughout his career as well. I'm looking right now, Josh Wallace is a pretty good player, the corner from Michigan. He kind of transferred in from UMass and really looks really good at Michigan in his first year there. So it's a big jump up in competition. He handled it really well. So I like him. Jalen McCullough, the safety from Tennessee, super highly graded safety as well. I think he's a really good player. Kenny Logan Jr., another safety out of Kansas that I think is really good as well. So yeah, there's a few guys that I think are really solid players. And obviously when you're talking about undrafted free agents, you're going to have to make an impact on special teams. If not, you're not going to make the team probably, right? So all those guys I just mentioned are going to have to contribute on special teams most likely. But I think there's multiple of those guys could definitely do that and maybe make the 53-man roster. We'll see. Yeah, absolutely. So anything else, Skinny T, from you?
Oh, no, I think you want to hit him with that USC question.
Yeah, so I got one more for you, Max. This is obviously a Rams show, but we cover all LA football, and USC obviously being one of those. So I can't remember if it was on your show or on another show, but I just saw recently a quote from you talking about Jonah Monheim, who's moving to center this year. And I think I'm paraphrasing, but mentioned he's something like the most underrated returning offensive lineman in the country, or one of the most underrated. So I was just curious to know, I think there's a lot of unknown with Monheim. I think from what I've seen, I'm at spring practices, and from what I've heard from coaches, he's made the transition extremely well. It was extremely wise for him to stay the extra year because he's probably projected to be an interior offensive lineman at the next level anyway. But there's a lot of excitement around him at that center position. So just what in your mind kind of makes that thought of him being one of the most underrated returning, offensive linemen in the country?
The fact that he play all 5 positions and play at a high level, right? I mean, in 2022, a couple years ago, he played over 700 snaps at right tackle and almost 300 snaps at right guard. This past season, he mostly played left tackle. So played right tackle, right guard, left tackle. Over the last 2 years, he's an 89.1 grade, which leads all returning Power 5 tackles. And Joe Alt, over the last 2 years, Joe Alt's the only tackle in America who's been more valuable according to our wins above average metric. So Monheim has played quite literally everywhere for USC's offensive line, and it makes sense that he goes from playing tackle, playing guard, and now he's playing center this year. So really playing basically all 5 positions for USC. And I can bet you right now he's going to handle it just as well as he's handled guard and tackle, just based off what we've seen the last couple of years. So I think he's a long-term interior guy. So it makes sense that they want to move him interior now, and I think that'll help him for his draft prospects when you can get his tape at center. You also have a lot of tape at guard as well. I think he's a superstar, and I think he is a guy that not a lot of people are talking about right now as one of the top offensive linemen in the country, and I think it's a mistake. I think he's probably around a top 5 offensive lineman, not even offensive tackle, not even guard, not even center, offensive lineman. I think he's around that range right now, and I think he's a really, really good player, and just his versatility and the fact that he's been elite no matter where he lines up. They're shuffling him around all over that offensive line, and he's still producing elite play. That is why I think he is, one of the most underrated players in the country and one of the best offensive linemen that we have in college football right now.
Love it. Well, a lot of Rams fans are USC fans too, so they'll love hearing that. And you alluded to him earlier. The last USC guy to do that, play all 5 positions, was Justin Dedich, who now is on the Rams on their undrafted. So shuffling around there, but we'll see how Monheim does. So Max, though, hey brother, we really appreciate the time. Thank you so much. You can find him at Max Chadwick CFB on X, and obviously all of his work over at Pro Football Focus. He is one of their great college football analysts. Max, thanks for the time, man. Really appreciate it.
Of course. Thanks for having me on, guys.